Welcome to Carroll Creates, a podcast series produced by Corcoran Library at Carroll College. This podcast explores creativity in all forms through the lens of Carroll College students, faculty, staff, and alumni. In our 5th episode, we have the privilege of having Dr. Richard Buswell with us, Carroll alum, medical doctor, and artist. We'll hear how Dr. Buswell has spent decades exploring ghost towns and homesteads in Montana, capturing these images in vivid black and white photographs. If you want to learn more about Dr. Buswell, check out the article about him in the Carroll magazine for winter 2020. This episode was produced by Elizabeth Carr and hosted by Carr and Heather Navratil. The episode's music track, Jazzing Around, was created by Dave Miles and provided by Zapsplat. Please enjoy the following episode.
Good morning. We are here today with Dr. Richard Buswell, Carroll College alumni, physician, and photographer. Dr. Buswell, what is your connection to Carroll College, and what did you take from that experience?
I began as a freshman in 1963, and I graduated in 1966. I was a hurry to get on to medical school, so I packed a lot of education into 3 years. The second thing that I most readily will tell people, Heather, and it's a real genuine feeling and statement from you. Carroll, I had medical school to follow. I had residency to follow. I had 2 fellowships to follow after that. And most sincerely, I can tell you that Carroll College had the most educational impact on me and was the most quality education that I had in all those years. And that's not just rhetoric for purposes of this interview. That's really true.
So please tell our listeners a little bit about your art.
The only art that I can claim is photography. But I've been photographing ghost towns and homesteads in Montana for now 50 years. I'm one of those dinosaurs who still does black and white film and still does black and white prints. I do my own processing of negatives and prints in my darkroom, which I have in our house.
Very cool.
So everything from tripping the shutter to mounting the print, I do. And I've been doing it for 50 years, and it's been a very meaningful part of my life. I was a physician in solo practice for 37 years, husband, a father of 3 children. So for many, many years, it was a hobby, and I would try to do as much photography as time would allow, which wasn't a lot. Then, now that I'm an old retired guy, I have more time to pursue photography at a more leisurely pace than I did before.
How did you first get interested in photography?
I'm born and raised in Helena, and I went to Helena High for high school, and I became the school photographer, so that was my first introduction to photography. It was, I don't know if you're familiar with the equipment, but it was an old 4x5 Graflex, a big camera. Walk around and photograph sports and contributed to the annual as well. But when I seriously became interested in photography, I was in the United States Public Health Service from 1971 to 1973 at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. And there was many other physicians there as well, one of whom was a Japanese physician who wanted to sell his camera equipment. It was used camera equipment. He wanted to get some new camera equipment. So I bought it from him, and I've been using the same equipment in the field and in the darkroom for 50 years. I'm not a techie. They're totally manual. There's nothing automated about them at all, so you have to stop and think about what you're doing before you make an exposure. So that's how it started at the NIH in 1971. And then following that service in the public health, I finished my residency, went to do a couple of fellowships as well. And they didn't allow for a lot of free time to photograph either. Plus, I wasn't back in Helena then. But as soon as my wife and I moved back here in 1976, I took this equipment and started visiting many ghost towns and homesteads that I had visited as a child. So my parents would take me ghost towning. It's among my earliest remembrances as a child was ghost towning with them. So I revisited a number of places as an adult that I had visited as a child and photographed them too, and I've been doing it ever since.
And I asked what fascinates you so much about ghost towns? Like, why that subject?
Well, I have an interest in Montana history as well, especially Montana frontier history.
Mm-hmm.
So a ghost town is a nice complement to my interest in Montana history.
Yeah.
I'm usually by myself when I'm hiking in the mountains and photographing. And when you come into a ghost town, at least for me, it's kind of a spiritual experience.
Mm-hmm.
You'll find old shoes, artifacts of all kinds in ghost towns. And the spirituality of it is, whose shoe is that? And if it's a child's shoe, is that child even alive anymore?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pensive time.
Yeah.
It's a time to reflect. And then hopefully I'll come away with a picture or two as well.
Yeah, thank you. So what story do you want your art to tell? Or what do you want people to take away when they look at your photos?
Ghost towns are a photogenic subject. Lots and lots and lots of people have done ghost towns, whether it's Montana or Colorado or wherever. So one of the goals I strive for is to photograph something in the ghost town that hasn't been done before. So I don't take pictures of an old barn or an old cabin just to have a picture of an old cabin or an old barn. I look for something unique about the cabin, about the barn that I've not seen before. It's certainly not in my portfolio as well. So one of the dilemmas that I face is trying to find something that I haven't seen before. Because again, I've been doing this for 50 years. I've seen a lot of old buildings too. And most of the time when I'm in a ghost town, I don't find anything that I haven't seen before. So I walk away not having taken a single photograph, but I keep at it as often as I can, and I expose about 15 to 20 negatives. Again, it's film, not digital. Expose about 15 to 20 negatives per year total, but they're usually unique. There's something I haven't seen before, and maybe others haven't either. So to answer your question, what I try to take away from a ghost town experience is coming away with hopefully a photograph or two, negative or two, that is new to the genre of photography.
Cool. I like that challenge,
It is a challenge, yeah, and I do a lot more hiking than I do photograph.
How did you decide to transform your initial interest in photography into a published format?
20-some years. I never exhibited my work. Nobody saw my work other than me and my wife. And then I happened to meet the director and curator of the Montana Museum of Art and Culture at the University of Montana in Missoula, and showed him some of the things that I had been doing for 20-some years and were essentially unseen outside of our home. He took a shine to what I was doing, and he offered me my first exhibition at the Montana Museum of Art and Culture. That was in 1991, I believe. So that was a validation, you might say, to me, that I was doing something that might be of interest to somebody besides me. And then from that initial exhibition, there came a publication. In fact, it was published in support. It was an exhibition catalog, if you will, for the first exhibition that I've had. And I now have 6 bodies of work, they're portfolios of work, and 5 out of the 6 have had exhibition catalogs or books published in addition to the exhibitions. And the 6th one, which is a 50-year retrospective, will be published in November of this year, 2020. So each portfolio of work has been accompanied by a book as well. So that was the transition to publication.
So what was that publication process like for you? Were there any surprises?
One surprise that continues to surprise me after 5 publications and the 6th pending is how long it takes. The first 3 books were published by the Montana Museum of Culture, the University of Montana Press. So it was fairly close by, but it still took a fair amount of time to publish them. The last 2 have been published by the University of New Mexico Press in Albuquerque, which is a press that has a special interest in strength in Western American genre of things, not only artwork, but history as well. And it's those last 2 books that you submit a manuscript for publication consideration, and before you have the book in hand, usually about 3 years will pass by. It's a lengthy process.
Yeah.
So the amazement, surprise, whatever word you want to use about publishing books is how long it takes. At least photography books and fine art books in general, I think it's a lengthy process to do.
Man.
Secondly, it's a process that is a lot of work. Speaking for myself as a photographer, you have to gather up enough photographs that I'm happy with to have in a published format. That takes years to usually gather enough, at least at the number that I shoot every year, which isn't very much. It takes a number of years to get a volume of photographs that you feel is publication worthy. And then usually there's some a preface, a foreword that has to be written. And so in my case, again, contacting people who are familiar with my work and see if they would write for the book or books. And that takes time to happen as well. So those are, I guess, the short story, Elizabeth. It takes a long time to get a book published, and there's a lot of work involved in it.
For sure. So how do you choose those few photos that get to be in that book? That must be very difficult. Even though you said you don't get to take a lot, it still must be hard to select that.
It is. Usually I don't shoot a negative, expose a negative, unless I'm pretty sure that it's going to be worth the darkroom time to print it. So most of the negatives that I exposed end up in prints that I'm happy with. That is not always the case. There are some compositions that you have through your camera that are exciting at the time that I took them. This is a keeper, if you will. But when I go to print it, I'm not happy with it. So again, the short story is most of what I print I will be happy with, but that's certainly not always the case.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
So it takes time again to get the volume that is needed usually for a publication.
Describe how you overcame one major challenge during the creation and publication process for one of your books.
Initially, the major challenge was interesting a press to publish it, because what I've learned is that presses, whether it's Montana or New Mexico or whatever, you get a lot of material submitted for publication consideration. They end up publishing a minority of those. There's just so much time in the day, if you will, to publish the books. So the major hurdle, especially with the first one, was, is this publication worthy? That's something I had to decide, and I felt it probably was. And then, as I mentioned earlier, when the Montana Museum of Art and Culture, the director and the curator, took an interest in my work, that kind of told me, well, gosh, it's not just my opinion that these are of some interest, it's perhaps other people as well. So that was the challenge initially. Once you have a book published, it's easier to get the second and the third and the fourth published, but it's that first one that difficult, and well, just letting it go was difficult, I guess. Yeah.
Are there a few things that kind of stick out in your mind of some unique shots that you've taken? You're like, wow, that was really cool, that I've been staring at it and never saw it that way.
Yeah. So the first several decades, I was kind of focused on artifacts that I would find in buildings. And then as time went on, I started noticing knots in the wood, in the log, in the plain lumber, whatever. And some of the knots are really interesting, and they're photogenic as well. So I like to say I'm doing a separate portfolio, I guess, of knots. And fortunately, all these buildings usually have knots with them.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of knots, they're not particularly interesting, but you keep looking and studying them, as I mentioned before.
Yeah.
Just don't look at the old building, study the old building.
Mm-hmm.
And then you occasionally find a knot that really is of interest.
Cool. Thank you. So where can people see your photographs and purchase your books?
The first three books, which were titled Echoes, A Silent Frontier, and Traces, are all out of print. But if somebody's interested in those three, you can find them on the secondary market like Amazon. The last two were published by the University of Mexico. That's the last two being close to home and what they left behind. Were published by the University of Mexico Press, and they're still available. So you can get them through a local bookstore, and then you in turn will order them from the University of New Mexico Press, or you can order them directly from the University of New Mexico Press. And then as far as exhibitions, they'll be exhibited from time to time, wherever. This 50-year retrospective that I shared with you is going to be exhibited at the Montana Museum of Art and Culture at the University of Montana from May 28th to August 29, 2021. So, and then I think it will probably travel after that. Most of my exhibitions have traveled to a variety of places in the United States and actually internationally as well, and you'll see those listed in the Vita if you are interested.
Great. We'll have to keep our eyes open for that.
And your local library does have all 5 copies right now.
The Correct
Meaning
Library.
Correct Library.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think maybe the Lewis and Clark County Library has it as well. The Montana Historical Library, or Society, definitely has them too. So here in Helena, there are 3 places where I think you can look at them if you want.
What are you working on now?
I'm continuing the same genre that I've always been doing. It's just new material. So I usually start shooting in the mountains about mid-March, and I end up about mid-November because it gets kind of cold and nasty by then. And then I go into my darkroom usually about mid-March, and so I go into my darkroom mid-November, and I usually be printing until about mid-March, those 15 to 20 negatives, so for that year. So I usually do them year by year, and I'm working on the 2019, and I'll be doing 2020 in a few months.
One of my favorite questions here is, do you have any advice for current Carroll students or aspiring photographers?
It kind of touches on what I may have mentioned earlier. Try to find a subject matter that you can relate to. And I've been relating to ghost towns since I was a small child. So a subject that interests you, a subject that you can relate to, a subject that you're familiar with, and in the case of photography, do something that you feel is unique, that you haven't seen before or haven't photographed before. You try to express something new.
We've got a couple library questions.
Well, the easy one, Heather, is one good memory you have of Corcoran Library. And as I said earlier in our informal conversation, Corcoran Library wasn't even here when I went to Carroll. So it was not part of, Corcoran Library was not part of my experience going here. And again, I graduated in 1966. The library then, just for Carroll historians, was in what we call the Science Building. I think it's called Simperman Hall now. and you'd walk up to the main steps to the second floor of the building, pass by the big lecture auditorium on the left side, and directly ahead was the library. So it was tiny compared to what you have now. And I'm envious of a student who has access to this kind of a library and going to college here.